Hello everyone, how y'all doing? So today I kind of want to talk about a lot of stuff that's been happening recently, and some of it are even somewhat related. The first two topics that I mainly want to talk about are somewhat related to each other. So I first kind of want to talk about AMD because throughout the past few weeks, I've been hearing a lot of stuff that um, kind of left me a little bit conflicted. So to kind of explain the situation, a couple of months ago, there was this controversy that occurred in which a lot of people thought that AMD would no longer be supporting RDNA 2. Now, at the time, I didn't really find that to be all that convincing because, like, the main argument seems to be because there was some statement that they made that RDNA 2 and RDNA 1, I believe, would go into maintenance mode. I believe that's the term that they use to describe maintenance mode. And a lot of people interpret that as essentially them saying that they were going to not really they're essentially just gonna I feel like people interpret the maintenance mode the same way how people interpret legacy mode, in which it's just kind of there and they're not really putting into the work of like actively maintaining this the same way they would one of their brand new GPUs. And a lot of people were really concerned about that because at the end of the day, it hasn't actually been that long since RDNA 2 has existed. A lot of people probably bought it within the past few years, and so the idea that they would no longer be supporting that anymore left a lot of people in shambles. It's like, dude, what the fuck? Like, why? Like, it hasn't actually been that long, and I understood that. I wasn't really too concerned though, because to be honest with you, I kind of suspected that this was probably an overblown issue. Like, I never really expected AMD to just stop supporting RDNA 2, mainly because even to this day, they're still selling hardware. Like, even if they're not necessarily selling dedicated GPUs anymore, like maybe even if they stop production of dedicated GPUs that have RDNA 2, there's still devices that rely on that architecture, such as the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck doesn't use Windows, so maybe that might not be the best example. But there's still some handhelds, I'm fairly certain, that have RDNA 2. There's still some, like, even to some degree, like certain devices like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series S and X, they use RDNA 2, and so I wouldn't imagine that they would treat this architecture like it's some like abandoned thing where they wouldn't want to continue, providing some degree of support. Like I just never really found that to be convincing. Now, what I did find to be convincing was the idea that maybe they just wouldn't really focus on, you know, trying to, well, I don't know if optimization is the best term to use, but like I would have to imagine after a certain amount of years, they probably already squeezed however much optimization that you can get out of RDNA 2 and RDNA 1. And so I would have to imagine that maybe we wouldn't really be seeing a lot of the same sort of like fine wine expectations that people have towards AMD graphics, as well as the fact that I didn't really imagine a lot of like new features coming to like I wouldn't really imagine them developing new features that would support RDNA 2 and 1, especially because it seemed like nowadays they seem to be focusing a lot of more AI based features, features that are powered by AI. And at the end of the day, those older architectures, they don't really support AI accelerators, and so because of that, I just never really, I expected that, yeah, maybe they're not really gonna, you know, treat this like it's some kind of like first class citizen thing. And that was mostly just going to be for the newer architectures that do have like AI accelerators, which, it's not a fun thing to hear. Like, as someone that has an RDNA 2 card, like, it's not necessarily the most fun thing to hear that, like, now I'm not exactly going to be treated like a first class citizen. But at the end of the day, it's not, I didn't care that much because, like, I don't know. I didn't like. I am someone who owns a 6900. I've for a very long time, acknowledged that I've sort of reached a point where um a lot of what I expect to happen with this architecture for the most part is just, having maybe some like game ready drivers for some games that might, act kind of funny. which even then, with the PS5 still existing and that being based on RDNA 2, I sort of doubt that we would be seeing a lot of like borderline game breaking bugs as a result of a new game coming out. I'd have to imagine that this is still an architecture that, for the most part, is still being used to test game releases to some degree, and so I wasn't really too concerned about that. But there is something that did happen recently that kind of left me a little bit wary, which is there was someone that proposed the idea that AMD would no longer be supporting the Z1 Extreme, if I'm not mistaken, or the Z1 chips, the ones that are used for handhelds. And the basis from this was they contacted Lenovo support, specifically the Korean for the Korean market, and one of the customer representatives said that AMD was no longer, well, I don't know if they said this specifically AMD was no longer supporting the Z1 chips, but they did say that like support for that chips was essentially gone. Now the thing is, when I initially heard that, I didn't exactly like immediately believe that, mainly because at the end of the day, it's coming from one customer support representative. This wasn't like an official statement that was made by either Lenovo or AMD, so I'm not just gonna take one customer support agent at their word. Like, I'm sure he has a reason to believe that, but like, unless there's some kind of statement made by either vendors, I'm not just going to immediately believe that, unless I could see it with my own eyes. But when I started to actually look at it from that perspective, I thought, oh, wait a minute. When I do see it with my own eyes, maybe there is some validity to this, because apparently, and I didn't know this, apparently like several months had passed since there were any new like chipset drivers for specifically the versions of the Lenovo Legion handhelds that have the Z1 chips. And when I heard about that, I was surprised, because like I didn't think it took that long for driver updates, but apparently that's something that people have been dealing with for a while. Like, apparently there's just not really a ton of like frequent updates that occur. And apparently, when he received that response from Lenovo, it had been like what, 5 months since they got a new update, which is kind of insane, because like 5 months without a single driver update. And that's when I thought maybe there is some truth to what this guy was saying. And of course, I still, I'm not one to necessarily believe everything that people post, because like, here's the thing, at the end of the day, this happens a lot in the tech world. It's very common to see people maybe not overblow, they overthink too much about things, because at the end of the day, there's not a lot of stuff that really happens in the tech world in general. Like, for the most part, nothing really happens until new stuff is released. And so during that period, like, a lot of the times, the most that we can really do is just kind of follow on leaks, follow on theories and assessments and potential rumors. A lot of the times, that's really the most that we can really do, because in general, just nothing really happens. And so I've seen this happen a lot, where people will see, like, there was even a time where, for example, people thought that like AMD was like blocking DLSS from being supported on their AMD sponsored games, even though there are games that are AMD sponsored that do have DLSS. And like, even then, like because the game that people were thinking about was like what's it called, like the fucking game from Microsoft and Bethesda, Starfield. And it's like, does AMD have enough power on fucking Microsoft to block DLSS if they want to add it? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like AMD is not that big of a company that I think they have a big enough influence to legitimately block a game company from not wanting to use the technology that they want to use. In fact, I would be much more inclined to believe that Nvidia would actually make that block, because they actually have control over the fucking GPU market. AMD is in the grand scheme of things, they're a pretty negligible company when it comes to GPU market share. I doubt they have enough power to actually block game developers from using technologies from their competitors just because they sponsor them. Because at the end of the day, like, being sponsored by AMD like means what? That maybe they might have some of their engineers help optimize their games, and that they're gonna bundle their games with some of the GPUs. It's like, how is that a good enough trade-off to not use a technology that they believe is going to help the game? It just doesn't really make any sense. It never really make any sense for me. But again, at the time, that was the only thing that people had going on. Like, because other than that, what else were people going to talk about? Not much. And so, I'm not just going to immediately believe this, but I would say that in this case, I do think that the evidence was pretty credible. Like, the DLSS blocking thing, I was like, dude, there's literally games that are sponsored by AMD that have DLSS. There's even games that are sponsored by AMD that don't even have FSRs. Like, you can literally look at the list. Like, this is obviously not true. But the thing about the chipset drivers thing is like, well, it's been 5 months, and for what it's worth, a customer support representative, while they're not literally Lenovo or AMD, at the end of the day, they do still work as, like, obviously, a lot of these people, they tend to work for outsourcing companies that provide service for these companies. So obviously, they're not like fucking buddies with the CEOs and engineers of these companies. So obviously, I don't expect them to have like some like hidden information. I'm sure they probably have as much information as we do, at least when it comes to certain things. But even then, like, at the end of the day, they are still a representative. I'm sure they probably have some information that we don't. I'm sure there might have been some discussions that happened that we aren't aware of. And if that's the case, maybe they're right. Maybe AMD really did stop supporting it. But now the thing is, eventually something did happen in the midst of all of this, and it's actually one of the main reasons why I even want to make this video. So there's this guy, Frank Azar. He's basically like the marketing guy for AMD and stuff like that. He retweeted this article because a couple of days ago, the ROG Ally actually did release a driver update for one of their handhelds that have the Z1 Extreme, and it's even titled ASUS ROG Ally receives timely GPU driver update despite rumors of AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme deprecation. And he retweeted this. And the thing is, Frank tends to read a lot about what happened, a lot about what people are talking about on the internet. He's even made fun of people, entertaining certain conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And so he's definitely aware of a lot what's being discussed on the internet. And so him retweeting this is obviously him signaling the idea that, guys, chillax, we haven't actually stopped supporting this. At least that's what I assume. Of course, I will still say though that, regardless if you guys have, because even then, like, I'm fairly, like, I've actually heard that even this driver apparently is based on like an older branch. It's not exactly like a new bleeding edge piece of software or anything like that. And so even with that said, like, it's probably not like I do still think that there are legitimate concerns about whether or not, like, someone who owns a ROG Ally and they have like a Z1 Ryzen chip, like, how many updates they can expect to see. Because I do even remember hearing, I was listening to a podcast from someone who said that, like, we're gonna start getting to a point where after some time, like, certain games are gonna come out and we're quite literally are not gonna be able to even play those games because they don't have game ready drivers. Now, I don't know if it'll ever get to that point. Probably not, if I'm being honest, or at least not soon. But even then, like, even with that said, like, it's not uncommon for, every month, there's always like a new driver being released, like a new adrenaline version. And usually people, they get this, like, with the expectation that, maybe, some features, like, for example, the implementation of FSR Redstone, or when they updated frame generation. No, it wasn't frame generation. I think it was AFMF to like 2.1. Like, usually when there's like, or even the anti-lag plus, like, usually, people, they do always anticipate the newer versions of Adrenaline under the expectation that something will change. And so to have to wait several months is kind of insane. And I don't know, like this to me caught me off guard because I actually didn't know that this is how it worked. I wasn't really aware. And to be fair, like I don't usually pay attention to how the development of a lot of these drivers for handhelds even took place. And I don't know whether to blame AMD or Lenovo or Asus, because at the end of the day, the difference between AMD developing drivers for a lot of these handheld chips that are specifically commissioned. Well, no, I don't know if I'd say commission, because like I don't think they specifically like commission like a custom chip for this. I think it's just more so that AMD developed this CPU in specific for handhelds, and it just so happens that Asus and Lenovo decided to go with that chip when designing their handhelds. But even still, like, at the end of the day, they do also have to develop drivers and, chipset drivers, GPU drivers for the specific BIOS that the OEM design these handhelds for. And so maybe the review QA process might be a little bit different from a lot of the drivers that they tend to release for their consumer GPUs, in which they have more control over. So I don't know. It's hard to say, but I will say though that like I wouldn't want, like, me hearing this made me think, if you're someone that has like either an Asus ROG Ally or a Lenovo Legion Go, I would probably just install SteamOS, if I'm being honest, because SteamOS is constantly getting fucking updates. They're constantly on the bleeding edge. Like, I would feel way more excited about running SteamOS than running Windows if this is with the expectation I get for like how often I get updates. So like, I don't know. That's just how I felt. But while we're still talking about AMD, there is something else that also happened. So there's this game, I fucking forgot the name of it. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm in this specific map, it's because I'm running out of sandwiches and I need the ingredients for sandwiches, but they're mostly only available in Kokoro's Heartscape, so I'm kind of just, farming stuff. But anyway, something like there's this one game and I don't remember what it is, but apparently it had like they accidentally leaked a DLL for an upcoming version of FSR that a lot of people are suspecting is most likely FSR 4.1. And in the process, people have noticed, some improvements. I don't know. I don't really like. If that was the whole story, then it's like, okay, sure, like, cool, sure, now you can run 360p. Now you can run at 360p with slightly less artifacts. Fine, sure, good, I guess. I guess it's good news. But what I did think was kind of interesting, people talking about, was mainly the fact that with this new version of FSR, it didn't seem like there was any indication that older architecture will still be supported. Like, it still seemed like it was exclusively an RDNA 4 thing, which... Oh, wait, I accidentally went to the first stage. That was by accident. But yeah, and to be honest with you, these discussions they've been weird, because at the end of the day, like, I don't 100%, like, actually, no, I do know how to feel, and it's mostly kind of confused, but also maybe not as much when you... Oh, wait, what the fuck? I didn't even notice that this guy was catching me. Like, I'm both confused, but also not as much when I look at the bigger picture. Because here's the thing, when FSR 4 was initially announced, or when it became apparent that this was going to be like the next upscaler for the RDNA 4 architecture, I always assumed that it was probably going to work on RDNA 3, because if AMD really was going to go with an AI-based upscaler, then I really had no reason to believe that it wouldn't work on RDNA 3, because RDNA 3 also has dedicated AI accelerators. However, when FSR 4 came out, it didn't support RDNA 3, which initially left me confused, because it's like, well, why? But like, at the end of the day, after digging in, I started to understand, and like, for the most part, it's really because this version of FSR is relying on specific data sets that only, like, for specific data formats that RDNA 3 doesn't exactly support, which is FP8. Because as far as I'm aware, RDNA 3 only really supports FP16. And so because of that, it can't really run this model. Now, even with that said, I still believe it was possible, mainly because on the Linux side of things, initially FSR4 didn't really work at all on Linux, regardless if you are using RDNA 3 or 4. It just didn't work, period. But eventually, people found a way to get this working, and the solution that people were experimenting gave light to a potential possibility in which you could actually run FSR4 through FP8 emulation using FP16, and by doing this, it was actually possible to run FSR4 with RDNA 3. Though of course, you know, the performance cost would be notably higher on RDNA 3. Like, you weren't going to get the same frame rate as you would on RDNA 4, but it's technically worked, and that to me was enough confirmation that, like, yeah, it's definitely possible. However, I did also acknowledge that, like, AMD clearly didn't, like, they didn't see it as worth it. I'm like, they just didn't really, they didn't see this as an opportunity to bring support, at least when it released. I still did believe it was eventually coming, especially because around the same time all of this was happening, we started hearing rumors of like FSR4 coming to the PlayStation 5 Pro, and it's like, dude, if FSR4 is coming to the PlayStation 5 Pro, that's like, dude, the PlayStation 5 Pro is like a hybrid of RDNA 2 and RDNA 3. If FSR4 can somehow fucking work on that on the PS5 Pro, there's no way they can't make that work on the on RDNA 3. There's no way. It's impossible. And so to me, it was just like, okay, it was only a matter of time. At some point, it's probably gonna come. But then time passed, and something really funny happened, and they open sourced FSR4, but they accidentally included files that they actually shouldn't have, and some of those files contain documentation for making it possible for FSR4 to run even with int8, with the int8 data format, which is not only supported by RDNA 3, but it's also supported even by RDNA 2. And so through that, someone was able to actually compile a specific DLL that runs with the int8 format, and suddenly we were able to get FSR4 to work even on RDNA 2. Now granted, it did not, like, there was definitely an improvement over FSR 3.1, but at the same time, you could definitely also notice that there are some quality, like, you can definitely notice the quality advantage when you see the normal model running under FP8 compared to int8. There's definitely a quality difference that you can definitely notice, but at the same time, you can also 100% notice the difference between FSR 3.1 and FSR4, to the point where it's like, you know, for me, like, even if I compare like how it looks to this model running on FP8, it's like I still would have wanted FSR4 on RDNA 2. I don't care if it looks a little bit worse. I don't care if it runs a little bit worse. This shit is clearly better than FSR 3.1. And so, yeah, that leak exposed something even greater, which is that even older architectures are still possible to run this, but clearly AMD doesn't really want to focus on that. And honestly, you know, again, I'm not really surprised, because this is just the direction that AMD has been going towards recently. It's like there seems to be more focus on trying to, like, focus on prioritizing AI-based features. It seems that just seems to be where it's at. They want to focus on AI. They want to fucking compete with Nvidia when it comes to AI adaptation, and that also includes with some of their gaming features like FSR. They want to focus more on making a lot of the features a bit more AI based. But even then, like, I still didn't see a reason for why this couldn't work even on RDNA 3. It's like, you know, you can either do it through FP8 FP8 emulation or through int 8. Like, there's clearly a way. Like, it's clearly possible. And so after several months of this initially getting leaked, and we're still seeing this thing not being supported on older architectures, a lot of people was like, dude, what the fuck, AMD? Like, why are we fucking playing pretend? This clearly works. Like, there was a time when people thought like DLSS could have worked on like the GTX cards, but like, you know, regardless if it actually could or not, like, Nvidia did have some leverage. They could to some degree say it was like, well, you don't have any proof that this can actually work. You're mostly speaking, like, you're mostly just saying it could theoretically work. But in the case of AMD, like, there is proof. We've literally seen this work. And so, I don't know, it's very odd for them to just kind of pretend like at some point, like at this point, it really does just feel like they're just denying support for it. And I mean, I for one, seeing all of this, I don't even really bother waiting for the official support. I just make this shit work on my computer myself because it works. But even if it's based on leaked code, but like it obviously works. And I don't know, like there is something that did happen where they PlayStation released a different version of PSSR, which I think a lot of people kind of hoped would happen. And so they did initially release this post on Twitter saying, oh, upgraded PSSR, whatever. And then Jack, I won't pronounce his last name because I'm fucking stupid. I don't want to mispronounce it, but my boy Jack here replied by like one of the last statements. He said, and we're just getting started. Stay tuned for our next FSR updated, bringing these advancements to more players worldwide. Now, does this mean that they're going to adopt it to more GPUs, or are they just saying that this newer update of FSR is going to get deployed to more players, and those players being RDNA 4 users? I don't know. And at some point, it does kind of become a case of like trying to like decipher warnings from an executive who's very careful about the way he's wording his things. And at some point, I can't even really be bothered. It's like, I'm just gonna leave it as it is. And if AMD decides not to provide support for FSR 4 with older generations, it's gonna come across as very odd, but like, I guess that's just what they want to do. I, on the other hand, I'm going to continue using FSR 4 because it clearly works, and that's what it's going to be. And the only thing I would say in regards to all of this is that I kind of understand what led them to this point, because for a very long time, AMD has been making features that are, generally speaking, aiming towards being hardware agnostic. So, for example, all the versions of FSR and frame generations, they all work not just across different AMD GPUs, but also across different vendors like NVIDIA and Intel. And this approach is theoretically the most consumer friendly, the most, open friendly decision, but it wasn't the decision that was actually making people happy. Like, when people talked about FSR, they weren't talking about how this is hardware agnostic. They were just talking about how this looked clearly worse than DLSS. Nobody was really like, it wasn't like AMD was necessarily getting rewarded for making this hardware agnostic. And so with FSR 4, it just kind of seemed like they changed the strategy by actually making this more, making this essentially exclusive to their newer architecture, because, that is what DLSS did when it initially released. You couldn't really use this unless you had the at the time it was Turing, I believe. And so, it also meant that a lot of people that own like 1080s and other GPUs, they couldn't have access to this technology. But it's how they were able to increase the brand, the RTX brand, And so it's clear that this is what AMD is doing, because that's just what, like, I guess they were just kind of pushed into going to this direction. It's not a good direction, but at the same time, clearly making this hardware agnostic wasn't really working in their favor. So I guess this is what they decided to do. I do still personally like. Here's the thing. For me, regardless of whether or not their technology is hardware agnostic or not, I do still hope that it's at least open source. To me, that's the part that matters to me more. Like, if as long as this continues to be a technology that is open in the sense that it's not like some proprietary feature, then in general I can still be interested in it, because at the end of the day, that's the part that really matters to me, more so than whether or not this can work on other GPUs. To me, if FSR doesn't work on GeForce cards, it doesn't really matter to me a whole heck of a lot. But I do care if the shit is open sourced. With that said, I do still think that they should port this to RDNA 3 and even RDNA 2. You know what, RDNA 2 I can even to some degree forgive, but RDNA 3, I think they should definitely port this to RDNA 3. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for them to just lock this to RDNA 4 when we've already seen, we've literally tested this. We know this shit works on older gen, so at this point it doesn't make any sense for them to just continue pretending like this only works with RDNA 4. So I think they should definitely do this, because like it just looks really bad on their part. But yeah, but speaking of PlayStation, there's something else that happened recently. Apparently, they well, firstly they shut down like the studio, the one that made the remake for Demon Souls, but apparently they also announced that they may be they may end up having to make less PC ports in the future. Now, of course, I don't think, like, I'm sure there's probably already some games that they've already been working on a PC port even before they make this announcement, and those games are probably still going to get ported to PC. I think this is just more so what's gonna happen, like, in the future, like maybe like a few years from now. You may see a difference in strategy where they're not going to prioritize as much porting a lot of their games to PC. And there's a lot that I want to talk in regards to this, and I may end up having to dedicate a whole ass video in regards to this. But in general, what I would say is that it's a little bit concerning, mainly because a couple of years ago there was something that they did that was really cool, and that is the fact that on GOG, if I search Horizon Zero Dawn, this is a PlayStation game and it's available on GOG, DRM free. And if I go to the publisher, PlayStation PC, there's also Uncharted, God of War, and Days Gone. And I was hoping to see more of this. I was actually hoping that PlayStation would do more to actually port a lot of their... I mean, Horizon isn't even old. God of War isn't even super old, to be honest. Like, it came out in 2018. Well, I guess it's 8 years, but still, like, it's not that old. And so I liked the idea that they were porting some of their games to GOG, but like, I get the feeling that they're not really gonna do that anymore, which is kind of a shame, because like, I personally, like, here's the thing. To me, when it comes to GOG, I don't think GOG will ever be a replacement to Steam, mainly because I think a lot of studios are still not going to release a lot of their games DRM free at release, because the fact of the matter is a lot of publishers are still very paranoid about piracy, and honestly, that paranoia is not going to go away anytime soon. And so they're only going to release their games on PC with the expectation that there's some degree of protection from piracy. And so yeah, because of that, I don't really expect them to release their games on GOG day one. Obviously, there are some studios that do that, but like, I don't expect most of them to do that. But I do at the very least expect that at some point, maybe studios might feel a little bit more willing to publish their games on GOG, especially if they've already made most of their sales on the first few weeks. Especially if the game has already been cracked after some point. Like, dude, if your game is cracked, like, at that point, just release it on GOG. You're not protecting against anything. There's clearly Clearly, people are fucking hosting their games on like notorious websites. So at that point, just release it on GOG, make it easier for your actual paying consumers. And so, yeah, and I like the idea that PlayStation was going in that may have been going in that direction, but if they really are trimming down on PC ports, then I have to imagine that this is probably gonna be one of the few ones that we're going to see, which is a shame. It's a real shame. Now, I will say though that I wasn't really expecting them to make this decision, but at the same time, I will also say that we may have seen this coming. That's all I'm gonna say. Again, I may end up having to make a dedicated video in regards to this. In fact, I might even write the script for this video after I stop recording this. But yeah, anyway, it's a real shame. But I guess we'll just have to make do with what we have. So yeah, stay safe.